money on your annual inspection. Specifically, this presentation will explain how certificated pilots can prepare for their annual inspection and at the same time lower costs by using preventive maintenance techniques.
Elementary maintenance can be defined as simple or minor preservation requirements and the replacement of small standard parts not involving complex assembly operations on the aircraft involved. The pilots are allowed to do elementary maintenance on the aircraft they own or operate, provided the maintenance is done in accordance with Chapter 575 of the Canadian Airworthiness Manual. Appendix A of Chapter 575 outlines the maintenance available under the definition of elementary maintenance. Careful consideration must be afforded when deciding whether or not a particular task falls within the scope of elementary maintenance. Since there's a huge variety of aircraft owned in Canada, a task that may be considered elementary on one aircraft may need a maintenance release on another. Elementary maintenance must be documented in the maintenance record of the item work done. The entry must include full details of the work performed, the date of completion, as well as the signature and license number of the person who performed the task.
Preventive maintenance is easy to do. It's a three-step process: cleaning, inspecting, and maintenance. The first step, cleaning, is actually the hardest because you have to work at it. Start with soap and water and a couple of cans of wax. With the aircraft manufacturer's instructions in hand, spend an intimate weekend washing all the dirt off the various nooks and crannies. Then follow up with a good coat of wax. This work will accomplish three things. First, a clean, well-waxed airplane is the best defense against corrosion. Second, a clean airplane is easier to inspect and maintain. And third, the pilot owner will oversleep on Monday morning. With preventive maintenance step 1, cleaning, out of the way, you'll need some tools for the inspecting and maintenance steps. You should have a flashlight, a mirror, and a 10-power magnifying glass, along with various hand tools like screwdrivers, wrenches, a ratchet and socket set, as well as a calibrated torque wrench, tire pressure gauge, safety wire, and cotter pins. And finally, you'll need the current manufacturer's maintenance manuals or instructions. Most aircraft manufacturers have 50 or 100-hour inspection checklists, which are useful in targeting specific inspection points on your airplane. The checklists are available from most fixed-base operators for a nominal fee. The idea of a preventive maintenance inspection is to identify problems so they can be fixed. Don't be afraid to spend a lot of time checking out the airplane. And when you do find a problem, don't hesitate to write it down. It looks like a big job at first, but you'll find it becomes easier if you divide the airplane into 3 separate inspection areas: the airframe, the engine, and the avionics. Your airframe inspection should include the flight controls, wings, tail section, fuselage, landing gear, and brakes. Starting in the cockpit, move the flight controls slowly through their full range of travel. Listen for binding or scraping sounds. Such noises are usually caused by a cable that slipped off its pulley or bad pulley bearings. Both situations make the airplane unsafe. Next, go to each flight control and check the control surface hinges and rod ends for rust, free play, or stiffness. Examine the wings, both top and bottom. Look for corrosion, rusty screws, fuel leaks, and distorted or cracked skin. Then inspect the leading and trailing edges for hanger rash, bird strikes, or other impact damage. The tail should be inspected for signs of corrosion, rusty screws, distorted or cracked skin. Vertical and horizontal stabilizers should be checked for any signs of looseness or impact damage. Check out the wing walk, first to make sure there is one, and then that it's serviceable. Inspect the windshield and side windows for any optical distortion or evidence of crazing. And when checking the windshield, make sure to check for cracks around the outside air temperature probe. The landing gear is next. Make sure the tires have the proper inflation, that the side walls are free of cracks, and there is no cord showing in the tread area. Brake discs should be free of rust, and there should be no evidence of brake fluid leakage. You can easily determine the thickness of the brake lining on most general aviation aircraft by putting a paper match on the brake lining. If you can't see any lining, only the match, chances are that you need new brakes. Your engine inspection should include the cowling, engine baffles, fuel and oil lines, the air filter, scat ducts, and the exhaust system. Starting with the cowling, see if there are any loose or missing screws. Even if there's only one missing, it needs to be replaced. With the cowling off, the engine baffle should be checked for cracks and chafe marks, because misaligned or damaged baffles can cause an engine to overheat. Examine the gasilator and carburetor for fuel stains, and don't forget to inspect the fuel feed lines for age cracks and flexibility. Check cabin heat scat ducts for signs of chafing or holes that could allow carbon monoxide into the cabin. Is the air cleaner dirty? A good rule of thumb is that it should be cleaned or replaced before every annual inspection. Any binding or stiffness in the engine controls must be investigated prior to your next flight. Now run up the engine and check the mag drop, idle RPM, oil temperature, pressure readings, vacuum, and the charging rate of the electrical system. After engine shutdown, check the exhaust system for cracks using the 10-power magnifying glass. Exhaust stains are good visual clues of cracks or poor slip joint alignment. Your avionics inspection should include the battery, the ELT, all radios and antennas, navigation lights, and PDOT heat. The heart of the avionics system is the battery. It should be inspected for correct fluid level and for any indication of corrosion. With the master switch on, operate the ELT during the first 5 minutes past the hour. Verify that the ELT is working by listening to 121.5 on your radio. Later, don't forget to check the battery's due date, even if the ELT worked the way it should. If the batteries are past due, replace them. At the same time, test all radios and navigational equipment.
Manassas Unicom, Piper 9631 Juliet, radio check, please.
93 Juliet, you're coming in loud.
Thank you.
Check the microphone switch to be sure that it doesn't stick in the on position. Make sure that all lights are working, including the cabin instrument lights, the navigation lights, the rotating beacon, the taxi light, and the landing light. Remember that it's a good idea to use your landing light in an airport traffic pattern area, even during daylight hours. Check the PDOT heat for operation, and don't forget to remove the cover. Make sure all antennas are securely attached to the airframe and show no signs of damage. Inspect the static vents for obstructions like wax or polish buildup in or around the vent holes.
Okay, Mr. Announcer, I've cleaned, I've waxed, and I've inspected the airplane from spinner to the tail tie down. Now, when can I start fixing my airplane?
Right now. By this time, you probably have a list of discrepancies from your inspection. Your list should be compared against FAR 43 Appendix A, which explains which preventive maintenance items that you can work on.
Okay, here's my list, and here are the things that FAR Part 43 says I can do.
Good. Let's start with the easiest. Replacing all rusty screws on fairings and inspection plates. You'll need a good number 2 Phillips screwdriver, some penetrating oil, a piece of cardboard, some paint, and a number of new screws, including both sheet metal and machine screws of various sizes. First, spritz a little penetrating fluid on the rusty screws, and let the oil soak in for about an hour. While you're waiting, punch holes in the piece of cardboard and fill them with new screws. Then spray primer on the heads, let dry, and then apply the color coat. Finally, replace the rusty screws. By doing this time-consuming work yourself, you help the mechanic complete your annual inspection that much sooner. You can also save the mechanic more time by lubricating the aircraft in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. But remember to wipe each grease fitting clean beforehand. Even though it's not on your discrepancy list, you can also change the oil and filter. And you probably won't have to remove the lower cowling if you rig up a drain hose with a hook made of safety wire and attach it to the quick drain on the aircraft. This allows the dirty oil to drain directly into a waste oil bucket. After removing the old filter and installing a new one, don't forget to torque it to the correct value. Since the oil filter must be safetied by wire, so it's always pulled in the clockwise or tightened direction, now might be a good time to discuss how to use safety wire. The most common safety wire on general aviation aircraft is stainless steel, and two popular sizes are 25 thousandths and 32 thousandths. Safety wire should be thick enough to fill 50% of the hole drilled through the head of the boat. To properly install the safety wire, cut a piece of wire at least 3 times the distance between the 2 points you intend to safety. Then insert one end of the wire through the bolt hole until a little more than a half of the wire is through. Bend the other end of the wire back around the bolt head in a clockwise direction, making sure that there is approximately an equal length of wire remaining. Now, twist the wire around itself with no more than 5 to 8 twists per inch until you reach the hole in the opposite bolt. Insert one end of the wire through the bolt hole and pull it tight. Bend the other end around the outside of the bolt, this time in a counterclockwise direction. Then twist the two ends together. Trim the excess wire, and then fold the twisted wire back on itself. You'll know the safety wire is correctly installed if the finished safety looks like a backward S. Aircraft batteries get less respect than Rodney Dangerfield. That is, until they quit. When you service your battery, always fill the cells with distilled water and make sure the positive and negative cables and terminals are corrosion-free and clean. To remove corrosion, you need a mixture of 80% water and 20% baking soda. Brush the solution on the corroded areas and wait until the fizzing stops. This means the corrosion has been neutralized. Then flush the battery with clean water and let dry. With the battery removed, check the battery box and lid for corrosion. Use the water and baking soda solution as needed. Then prime the bare metal and finish off with an acid-proof paint. And finally, reinstall the battery and coat the terminals with a thin layer of grease. If the battery is weak, charge it for 8 to 10 hours in a well-ventilated area with a charger that will put out only 1.5 to 2 amps. Never take your aircraft battery to a gas station for a fast charge. The 30 or more amps and excess heat will cause the smaller aircraft battery cell plates to buckle and short out. Removing and replacing worn tires is another preventive maintenance item permitted by Appendix A of FAR Part 43. But before changing the tires on your airplane, Read the manufacturer's instructions carefully. Use the recommended jack, tools, and techniques. And always chock the opposite wheel. Never change a tire in high wind conditions. When removing any light general aviation aircraft tire, deflate the tire after it's off the ground. Then remove the big cotter pin and the wheel nut. Disconnect the brakes and use a clamp to hold the brake puck in place so it won't leak. Now, slide the tire off the axle. And then place a block under the axle as insurance against jack failure. Remove the wheel bearings and clean with solvent. Never use high-pressure air to dry them, because this increases bearing wear. Use the grease recommended by the manufacturer. You can buy an inexpensive bearing packer or simply pack the bearings by hand. After separating the wheel halves and removing the old tire, check each for cracks and corrosion using the magnifying glass. You are not permitted to make any repairs on the wheel halves themselves. Before reassembling the wheel halves, the balancing mark on the tube must be lined up with the balancing mark on the tire. Then, after assembling the tire and wheel halves, tighten the wheel half bolts with a torque wrench to the inch-pound setting as specified in the manufacturer's instructions. Inflate the tube to the proper pressure and then deflate. This positions the tube in the tire and removes any wrinkles in the tube. Finally, put the wheel on the axle. Tighten the axle nut and safety. Then, inflate the tire to the proper pressure and reinstall the brake cylinder. Lower the aircraft to the ground and remove the jack. If you use recap tires on a retractable gear airplane, you should perform a gear retraction test before flight. Recap tires can be slightly larger in diameter than new ones. So there's a possibility that the tire could get stuck in the wheel well, and it's better to discover that on the ground than on final. If your landing light isn't working, you can troubleshoot the system and make repairs. The landing light system has 4 elements: the light itself, the switch, the circuit breaker or fuse, and wiring. This is the only electrical circuit on the airplane that you're permitted to repair. The weakest point is, of course, the bulb. Inspect it carefully. Broken filaments or discolored glass mean that the bulb is defective and must be replaced according to the manufacturer's instructions. If the problem is not the bulb, check the circuit breaker or fuse. If both are okay, the problem could be in the wire that runs through the cowling. With the master switch off, Open the cowling and follow the wire back from the landing light to the firewall. Check for breaks in the wire or for places where it has chafed against the skin of the cowling. If it still doesn't work, clean the landing light terminals and wire connectors with sandpaper until they're shiny. If the light still doesn't work, it's time to call in an expert. If your preventive maintenance inspection revealed other burned-out bulbs or cracked lenses, you may replace them as well. If your seat belts are worn, you can replace them too, but only with a TSO PMA-approved part. Automotive seat belts are not permitted. As a pilot, you probably know that hydraulic struts need frequent attention, but you may not know that under Appendix A of FAR 43, you can service them yourself. The following suggestions might be helpful. You'll need a valve core remover, a hose, at least 2 feet long with an internal diameter 3/8 of an inch, and 2 quarts of hydraulic fluid in a clean, 1-gallon plastic milk carton or similar container. Then, jack up the aircraft as per the manufacturer's instructions. Remove the strut dust cover and cap. And very carefully let the air out of the strut, the same way you deflate a tire. Remove the valve core carefully so you won't strip the service fitting threads. Wrap safety wire around the end of the hose so that it will fit tightly on the strut service fitting. Then attach the hose to the strut service fitting and place the other end in the gallon container so it reaches the bottom. Slowly raise the wheel and strut. This will force air and fluid out of the strut and into the container. Next, slowly pull the wheel and strut down. This will draw hydraulic fluid into the strut. Repeat this procedure several times until no more large air bubbles are forced back into the container. Then, push the wheel and strut all the way up one last time. While holding it there, have someone else remove the hose from the container. Then, let the wheel back down. Remove the hose from the top of the strut, replace the valve core, and add dry, filtered air or nitrogen to the recommended air pressure. Finally, with the aircraft sitting on the ground, check the strut extension by measuring the exposed chrome strut. Compare your measurement with the manufacturer's recommended length. You'll probably have to add or release air a few times to be within the specs. You can also replace your engine spark plugs. But while preventive maintenance will allow the pilot to do this, you must use approved spark plugs, properly gapped, and have assorted hand tools, including a calibrated torque wrench. You must also follow the manufacturer's instructions to the letter. If you have any questions about changing spark plugs, ask your mechanic. Other preventive maintenance items that a pilot can do include replacing prefabricated fuel lines, replacing any hose connection except hydraulic connections, removing, checking, and replacing magnetic chip detectors, replacing seats or seat parts if not a complex operation, making small repairs to fabric aircraft as long as the repairs don't require rib stitching, replacing side windows if the work doesn't interfere with the aircraft's basic structure or operating systems, refilling the hydraulic reservoir, making small repairs to non-structural fairings, cover plates, or the cowling, and repairing upholstery. Here's a sample entry in the airframe logbook for a landing light replacement. Remember that all maintenance work you do must be recorded in the appropriate logbook, and you must include the date, total time, description of work performed, your name and pilot certificate number. Spending a rainy weekend with your logbooks and Advisory Circular 43.9B titled Maintenance Records should help you organize your aircraft's paperwork and also save the mechanic time in researching the maintenance history of your airplane. In summary, remember that preventive maintenance items are found in Appendix A of FAR Part 43. And while performing any preventive maintenance, always refer to the aircraft manufacturer's instructions and procedures. It's also important to use calibrated tools. And finally, don't forget that preventive maintenance requires a maintenance entry in the logbook. While preventive maintenance can help you get to know your airplane a little bit better, preventive maintenance will also help keep the aircraft in the best shape possible, not just for your annual inspection, but throughout the year.